lost at sea.
Right, good afternoon, councillors, staff, members of the public. Welcome along to this meeting of the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee. The live stream has begun, so just a reminder, if you've got a cell phone on vibrate, it's going to go straight through the table. It's a good idea to tuck it into your pocket. We have no apologies, but I should note that Councillors Abbott, Crackett and Arnold are all in attendance via Zoom. No apologies that I'm aware of. Count as for everybody. May I at this stage offer a formal welcome to our two mana whenua representatives to the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee meeting. You'll have noted that we've included your names on the cover sheet of the agenda as an expression of the true love that was promised. Thank you, and we certainly look forward to your contribution over the meetings to come. First item is the report from the Invercargill Youth Council, and we've got Brooke and Tiffany, if you want to come up and take a seat. Welcome along. We've had a chance to have a look at the report. We're getting near to the end of the year for you guys, so it's over to you.
Good afternoon, Councillor. I'm Tiffany Fan from Southland Girls High School, and I'm in the Overs in Youth Council.
Hi, I'm Brooke Brown-Ogilvie, and I'm also from Girls High, and I'm also in the Overs. So obviously our Youth Council year is coming to an end, and at our last meeting, so we've got one more meeting after the last, and last meeting we agreed to adopt the current terms of reference for 2022 with no changes. We have appreciated having a councillor at every meeting, as this has been quite valuable. At our recent meeting, we had Courtney Brown attend as a speaker from Active Southland. We were engaged with her and we're engaged and asked lots of questions, and we're keen on making a committee next year to get the obviously community involved with being more active. And for our end of year event, we decided to go bowling and have a meal at Koji.
Yeah, and recently we've been made aware of the Te Reo Māori strategy, and we're very positive about this, and we'll be looking at adopting the final version next year and possibly also implementing some targets. And recently we've also been made aware of the Youth MP coming up next year, and fortunately 4 of our members are looking to run as a candidate, and another 4 are looking to sit on a panel to assist with the Labour Party candidates alongside Dr. Liz Craig. Youth MPs will be allowed to go to Wellington and sit in Parliament for a day in June, and the Youth Council applications are open as we're coming to the end of the year, and the new and returning members are welcome to join again. And we're looking for young people living in Invercargill between the ages of 12 and 24. We're expecting half of the membership will be made of school nominees and the other half from community applicants. We're also excited to announce that the UN Youth Declaration documents has been released and is available on the ICC website on the Youth Council page. And that's everything.
Cool.
Is there any questions?
Councillors? There are none. It's been a busy year for you, and again the Youth Council this year, much like last year, has had to pivot and have a few meetings online, which has interrupted things, but we certainly appreciate the perspective that you bring in your reports to us, and also the opportunity that Councillor Crackett and I have to interact with you. I think you've been a credit this year. It's been really enjoyable. Councillor Crackett's been involved for a few years preceding this. You might have some comment, Alex.
Yeah, I share the same sentiment. It's always a privilege getting to sit alongside and participate in the youth democracy, and honestly the things that Youth Council come up with and the things that they're really passionate about I can bring to this table, and I really value it. So thank you very much, guys, for participating this year. Hopefully see you next year.
Want to move the recommendation, Alex?
Absolutely.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. If there are no further questions or comments for the Youth Councillors, Councillor Lewis, my apologies.
I must also commend the Youth Council for having 2 very active members on the Creative Communities Committee. Their input has been valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder, Councillor, get that mic in nice and close for everybody on Zoom. Thank you. If there are no other comments or questions, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Brooke and Tiffany, you've given up time during the holidays and valuable study time, no doubt, as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. We appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Councillors, the next item is the Invercargill representation review, hearings and deliberations. We've got the report from Michael and Rhiannon. We've got a submitter to hear very shortly. Do either of the staff wish to kick off with a couple of comments? Michael?
Sorry, tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, councillors. Sorry, just a quick introduction just to remind everybody where we're at with this representation review. We are now in the very final stages. We've had the submission stage from the public after your initial proposal has gone out. Your deliberation today will make a recommendation to council to adopt a final proposal. So this is the hearing stage. We have the one submitter who wished to speak to you. Just to remind everybody, his submission is on page 43 of the meeting agenda, so you can find it, and I'm sure everybody is well aware of the hearing process, so I won't repeat that. And without too much further ado, I'll hand it over to the submitter.
Thank you. Just before that, Councillor Clark.
Yes, just through you, Chair, just to ensure there's no conflict of interest. Both Tim and I, who is the presenter, are in the Invercargill Ratepayers group, but I'm not involved with his submission today.
Thank you.
Perhaps, Chair, I will declare a vague interest. Mr. Mulligan is a family member, one exempt family member of mine also.
Have you had any discussions around them?
No, we have not.
Then you are fine.
Thank you.
Thanks. Tim, welcome along. Please come and take a seat. If you want to pop up to this chair here, we've got a safer one. Actually, one it's easier for you to be seen at. Just a reminder, councillors, as Mr. Morris said, Mr. Mulligan's review is on page 43 of board books. Sir, the time is yours.
Your Worship, councillors. Now, I'm a wee bit unfamiliar with the process, so I'm going to read my submission and then put the bones on it, if you like. Righto. I'm astounded that the Invercargill City Council has invited consultation from the public on the number of councillors, wards and community boards, etc., but there was no public consultation on the two Maori representatives. It is my opinion that people of Maori descent have the same opportunity to stand for council as any other aspiring candidate. I also think that this new process shortchanges some of the democratic system. Other aspiring councillors put their names forward, generally with a short bio stating what they stand for and what they believe in, etc. By and large, they are also required to front up at pre-election meetings and be asked to answer questions from the voting public on what their policies and principles are. That's the first part. With regard to commenting on the number of councillors, given that we're going ahead with the two Maori councillors, I think there should be only 10 other councillors. The Bluff community to stand as it is. As an Otataua resident, I think we're closely enough aligned with the city not to require a community board. Right. Now, up until this substantial change on how our 12 councillors plus 2 arrived at, the same conditions for either seeking election to the council or voting on elected members has been the same for all citizens. Now there is a second avenue for a group to gain seats at the table. Under our present system, the mayor and elected councillors are essentially up for a performance review every 3 years. If people haven't been happy with their contribution, then more than likely they're not going to get a vote on for the next term. What are the performance sort of review policies around the two appointed seats? That's the question I'm just leaving open there. The reason for suggesting in my submission that we should cap the number of council seats to 12, and that is 10 elected seats and the 2 appointees, is I think it's hard to get consensus from 12 people plus the mayor. I think it's difficulty hard. It almost accelerates exponentially when you start increasing the numbers. I think 14 makes it more difficult to arrive at consensus on things. And if under this process, if more non-elected people are able to be promoted to council through non-elected seats, appointments, then I don't know, we could end up with 14 or 16 seats possibly in the council in a very short time. I also think that if we keep the current seats to 10, councillors might value their seats a bit more. They might be a bit less prone to tampering with democracy as it stands. Further concern might be a bit fanciful, but what's to stop other special interest groups demanding a seat at the table? Like we've got groups like the ILT here who are significant in town, big footprint, and they might say, we'd like an appointment. Somebody like Scott O'Donnell, who's poured a great deal of effort and probably finances into town over the last few years, might like a seat at the table. Where do we go? Yeah, I wouldn't mind asking the councillors, like it's required 7 or more to take this vote without consultation. I wouldn't mind asking any of them why they thought that was appropriate without some sort of consultation. It's sort of, I think it undermines a lot of people's democracy. Regarding, I made a comment on Three Waters, and I would truly like to think that by the time this comes for consideration, councillors feel an absolute obligation to invite consultation from the community before any discussions on the proposed legislation are made. That's the extent of my submission.
Thank you, Mr. Mulligan. Over to councillors if you have any questions, bearing in mind that they're questions, not comments at this point. I have some comments, but I'll wait until we get into the debating of submissions.
Right.
Are there any questions? Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask Mr. Mulligan if he was aware of the partnership principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
Not particularly, no.
Thank you, Mr. Mulligan.
Any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Your Worship.
The special treatment is being awarded to or found to the Maori areas of our community because...
Sir, is it a question or a comment? Because we're going to get into the comments shortly.
Okay.
You will have an opportunity. So I'm just sticking to questions at this point. Any of the councillors on Zoom have any questions for Mr. Mulligan? Nope. No others? Thank you, sir. We do appreciate you taking the time to come along this afternoon and for making your submission. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, that brings us back to the recommendations. But before we get to the recommendations, Councillor Amundsen, you've led this process. Have you any comment you'd like to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it's great to be at this point of the representation review where we've had the review out for submissions with the public, and great actually to have so many submissions come in, I think just over 30, which is really good to get that feedback. And I would note that most of the feedback does support the 3 areas that we have identified in the report, which is that we remain with 12 councillors and a mayor, that we are elected at large and across the city rather than through a ward system, and that we retain the Bluff Community Board with its 3 members and 1 appointed councillor, and with the same existing boundaries. So yeah, just would like to extend my thanks to all the people who have taken the time to submit. We don't always get submissions in support of the things that we put out, and it is always good to get people who do submit in support, not just people who submit against. Thank again the community panel who did a really great job of canvassing the community before all of this report came together. And of course, a big thanks to Michael for all of his work in making sure that it all came together and was all done on time so that we didn't miss any of our deadlines. And I guess I just wanted to make a comment around the mana whenua seats. Whilst they weren't exactly part of the representation review, there was some engagement around that as part of that process. And I guess really the important thing to me is that the Local Government Act gives us a mandate to make such appointments, and that is why we have done it. And as Councillor Soper alluded to, it is part of our obligations under the Treaty of Waitangi as well. So thank you. I'm happy to move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Emerson.
Happy to second those, Mr. Chair.
Open for comment. Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I've got a question that is concerns representation review, but I don't think it's covered under our bit, but it's more covered under local government review or something like that. And through the chair, I'd like to direct the question at Michael. It's regarding how with something like the regional council, you have the group of elected members selecting a chair. With territorial authorities, we have a mayor contested for a separate spot, and then you have the elected members contested. The reason I raise that is that, look, the Local Government Act is quite specific on the role of a mayor. It says quite clearly, 41A, Section 2, it is the role of the mayor to lead the development of the territorial authorities' plans, including the long-term plan, the annual plan, policies and budgets for consideration by members, etc. It's quite it's a job description, and this is statutory law. It's not like it's an optional thing to do. And I'm just wondering, taking that into account, when you look at the bigger picture, the election of a new mayor there is no interview by the board or whatever. You get the role. You could be a brand new person, never done local government before, and yet you are expected to do that under law. Jump straight in. Whereas with the regional council, health boards, the group of members would choose the person most capable democratically. And I'm just wondering, is this something that would be done, obviously not under a representation review, but I believe this got changed around in 1989, and maybe the local government review would potentially look at this representation?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I think this is on, hopefully. Yes. The short answer is yes, would be within the purveyance of the local government review. You are quite correct. The position of regional councils were established in 1989, and they were decided that they could elect their chair from amongst their members, whereas the position of mayor is, of course, a very old position, and it's essentially a hangover from what came from the UK during the colonisation process, and has remained in statute ever since. It is something that I suspect, when you're looking at all of the functions of territorial authorities and council and that local government review, it is something that will need to be considered as part of that.
Thank you. That's answered. Yeah.
Thank you. I guess the comment I'd like to make is that it would be easy through the process to have confused the consultation that we were doing around Māori wards and the representation review, because they were actually two separate pieces of consultation. One was with the wider community, one was with iwi specifically. But because they were being done at the same time, I understand how it's easy for several of the submitters to have confused the issue. They are separate, and it's provided for in the Local Government Act. I wouldn't describe our iwi as interest groups. There is a partnership that exists between Māori and the Crown, which is a couple of steps above where we're at, and that's where this becomes an option. and in consultation with both Awaroa and Wahaupai, they both very clearly said that the option to have representation on the council committees was of more value to them than a Māori board. And so our mana whenua representatives sit on our committees, not on council. And around the question that was raised around review, well, that's up to Awaroa and Wahaupai. Each time they make their appointments, they decide whether or not the representatives they've had on this committee and infrastructural services have done a good job. Not our business. But I again think it was useful to go through the process. The involvement that we had from members of the public was good in not only coming forward but also nominating themselves to be on the panel as well. So Tim, you had a comment you wanted to make.
Yes, just that there are special occasions where it assists the bigger group of any community in making decisions like this. And one of it is COVID. Why is this separate strength given to COVID? And it's those areas where a mayor can be an advocate for the region, and that would be spelled out in the Act as well. So there are advantages to both communities by having, I think, a positive approach to this issue.
Thank you, Sir Tim. Michael, can I just ask a question? That recommendation 4 is requesting a final proposal be brought to council. When's that coming forward? Is that the next council meeting?
That would be correct, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. And in light of the position I've previously taken, I just want to express my opposition to the 2 appointed positions. That's no reflection on the people that have been appointed. I want to be quite clear on that. The Local Government Act, from my reading, does not allow appointments to full council, and I believe the ethos or the understanding of that is that the decision making of any council needs to be with elected members and elected members only. And the Local Government Act does allow for appointees to committees, and it does also suggest that we need to engage with mana whenua, and I don't have any opposition to that. What's unique to this council is we have delegated our decision making to those committees, and in my view, in light of that, we should not have appointments on the committees that have a voting right that's not through an elected process. So I just want to continue to have that opposition. Thank you.
Noted. Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't going to comment, but for the members of the public listening on Zoom, I think it has to be made clear that there are by statute certain decisions that cannot be delegated from council to its committees. In Invercargill, I will not try and summarise all those at this time, but I will point out that Invercargill has not delegated all decisions to committees because there are some by statute that can only be made by council. I would not like anybody who is listening to us on Zoom be left with the incorrect impression that we have somehow given full voting council privileges when that is not in fact the case. We have appointed, as per the partnership principles, to our committees, in my opinion quite rightly, 2 mana whenua representatives of very high quality. We have not delegated all council decisions to those committees. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I think it's also worth noting that there are similar delegations to the committees in Wellington City, where there are also mana whenua representatives as well. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, but just a point of order on that, Chair. Need to challenge the incorrect impression that my colleague has alluded to. I didn't suggest that all had been delegated. I do appreciate that there are some statutory delegations that we retain at full council, and we also retain the issues that involve the chief executive's employment. But in realistic terms, probably 95 or 99% of what we deal with on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis is now delegated to those 2 committees. So people that are listening and need to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, we're starting to cloud the issue around the representation review, so I'll bring the discussion back to that. So we've got the 4 recommendations. The suggestion is ultimately that the final proposal, taking into account the feedback from councillors, comes to the next full meeting of council. 4 recommendations have been moved and seconded. Are there any more questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against?
I'm
Carried.
opposed.
Sorry?
I'm opposed. Excuse me, I'm opposed.
Would you like your vote recorded?
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 6, we've got the minutes of the Community Wellbeing Fund Committee meeting. Councillor Lewis?
I'd like to move those be accepted, Mr. Chair.
I can second that.
And doing so, also, I'd like to thank the staff for all the extra work they do behind the scenes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. If there are any questions or comments, now's the time. If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. We've got the minutes of the last PPP meeting back on September 14th, which we had most of us over Zoom. Would somebody like to move that they're a true and correct record? Councillor Skelt and Councillor Pottinger. Any questions? Councillor Abbott, did you have a question, or are you just resting your head?
No, I was moving it, but I was
You're really going to have to sort out a microphone, Councillor. Oh, you were trying to move it? Yep. Okay. Thank you. Your mic level on that computer is really light. Thanks. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 8 was originally coming to this committee, which was around the mana whenua rolls, and we were expecting a report around honorarium. Claire, do you want to discuss that? We could.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would advise the committee that Michael Morris and I met with representatives from the Tūrunaka last week, and after engaging with them, I offered that it would be possible for this committee to hand back its delegation for this item only to council for council to consider it at its meeting at the end of the month, and they have so asked. So I would ask that the committee resolve to do that.
I'm happy to move that.
Councillor Amundsen and Councillor Soper. It's open for discussion. That's the time that it'll take. That's the time it'll take. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Time for some name calling. Brings us on to item 9. Michael, I see you have a microphone. That's very handy.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. We've got two reports under 9 and 10 on your report, which are both naming rights to roads. The first one is for Sunrise Drive, 46 Sunrise Drive, and the name that's been put forward there is Glenda Place. That's consistent with the current policy, as per the terms laid out in the report. The second one, through yourself, the Chair, if it's okay to do both together.
Yes, absolutely.
The second report, which is Ranchhunt Street, is also there, but that is the name there is Morningside. I'll just get the confirm Morningside Lane, and that again is compliant with the current policy in relation to the naming of roads.
Thank you. So they both meet with within the bounds of the policy, and they've both been agreed to by developers. I'm happy to take the two together if somebody wants to move the two recommendations. Councillor Pottinger, Councillor Clark. Open, Councillor Amundsen.
I just wonder about the actual policy itself, if I can be so bold as to ask.
Be bold.
How many decades ago was the policy put in place?
2.
Only 2?
Quite simple. Really 2. I remember it.
Wow. Okay. It just seems, because we've done a few names of streets in the last few PPP meetings, and they're all very European names, and I wonder actually whether there's anything that we can do to the policy to make it a little bit more modern.
When does the policy come up for review, Michael?
Maybe 2 decades.
No, you can review it at any stage.
Through yourself, the chair, the policy hasn't been reviewed in some time. We could actually, through council, instigate a review. We are looking at the option of doing a policy review at the moment.
Cool, thank you. Pania.
Yeah, I had a similar question because I was actually, the question is there a reason why we don't reflect our Māori heritage by using a kupu Māori type name, or are we always going to be reflecting our Scottish heritage and our other heritage?
So at the moment, if I can proceed, the policy seeks suggestions from the developers, but I guess a review of the policy could put forward or give more prominence to some of the other options that are available. So as a separate process, I think it would be good. It's sufficient for us to signal that we would appreciate a paper coming forward. Rhiannon? Sorry?
Just to clarify, Chair, if it's helpful that the current approach follows the generic industry guidelines, there is no formal policy as such except to follow those guidelines. So it would be a case of introducing a policy, which is potentially what Council might like to request.
I think that sounds good. I must obviously remember when we adopted the guidelines. It felt like a policy, but it's like stepping on a piece of Lego. It feels a lot bigger than it actually is. So back to the two names. So I think we can have a paper come forward at a future PPP meeting and just look at the formation of a policy. But we've got two suggested names in Morningside Lane and Glenda Place. We had a mover and seconded, didn't we? Yes, we did. Any further discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, and noted the raising of hands on Zoom as well. District plan effectiveness. Who's taking us through this? Trudy? No? Yes?
You can do it from me.
You've got a microphone.
So, kia ora koutou, councillors and your worship. I'll take the report as read, and it's very simply, we are undertaking an effectiveness report and update about our district plan, and you'll note that we may include, or we will include, a section that addresses climate change matters, and also if there is any information that comes to light where we could make improvements to the district plan, that we may look at making some changes to that effect.
So two questions from me. One, have you got a timeline that you're thinking of?
The team are working to have that in early next year to have the first report back to the committee.
Secondly is really just confirming that we wouldn't have to do an entire review of the district plan. We can just pick out the pieces of it that we wanted to change.
That is correct.
More effective.
That is correct, my understanding, Councillor.
Thanks. Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Chair. Intensification for housing, where around CBD it's been raised, areas like South City, Windsor, where you're close to community facilities, walking distance, and we don't want to be sprawling. Obviously the city doesn't want to be expanding, yet any plan is quite restrictive into the size of a section. You've got to have X amount. So we going to look at that if we need to get more dwellings, the demand, and people don't want sections, and is that something we're going to be more permissive with or look at?
Look, I think it's a broad approach at this stage, but I'll take on board the feedback and something that I can get our specialist staff to address.
If you have certain zoning for
yes.
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the short answer is yes, you can. You can do reviews of the district plan that look at the appropriate zoning. So if you had more urban style living, which is living without sections and with higher levels of noise allowed. I think that currently exists within the CBD, but your suggestion of do you take it out into some of those hubs where similarly there are those retail zones or zones when you can expect greater noise and people wanting to locate closer to that for convenience, certainly you could do that through this process.
So I guess the main question is, do we wait for developers to come and bang the door, or are we to be more proactive and say, hey, we're quite keen for this to happen?
Well, this is a chance for us to review that, Councillor, and to make sure that, as you see the broad headings, strategic context, so that would fall under that with where we were sitting with the housing, in terms of housing longer term.
And I think, bearing in mind there's national pressure for an increase in housing, it's probably quite time that we look at that. Your Worship.
Yes, if we're looking at the issue of crises, we've just had a meeting with the Regional Council and looking at flooding at the airport and all sorts of dramas that could happen to us. But I feel that the biggest crisis we're facing and will ever face, and it's not Three Waters, it's the levels of death that's going to happen in our community as a result of COVID. And we've got to, I believe, start preparing for the worst as well as believing in the future, of course. But, and what can we do to prepare ourselves if the worst does come to the worst?
Thank you, Your Worship. Probably a broader issue for Council and not really a district plan one, but worthy of note. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just like to reinforce what Rangi had said before. We had a submitter about 2 or 3 months ago, a developer who raised this issue about the ability to intensify within the inner city. And I agree. I think we should, as a council, be looking towards rules that allow those developers to proactively develop what they want and not be on the back foot against our rules. And I think if we can, I mean, don't say that be open slather, but
well, you just did.
Well, no, what I'm suggesting is that if you tighten the rules up too much, it's too hard for developers to come forward. And that's what the submission we had last time, which Rangi was talking to, that we need to have some ability to encourage people to look at alternatives than the standard plots that we have at the moment.
Well, interestingly, one of the people who came to us recently was talking about tiny houses, and actually the ability for those types of houses to be erected in the city already exists, and it's quite often a case of we'll come and ask, but at the same time, maybe we should be looking at promoting what options there are that are available. Councillor Amundsen, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, I think I did. So I just note that there's obviously going to be more than one report coming, that it talks about the main focus of the report to be produced by the end of 2021 is to be on residential development, subdivisions and natural hazards. And I'm just wondering whether, with all the talk of housing, that maybe rather than just residential development, it could have a broader scope and be talking about CBD residential development as well as, suburban development and those kinds of things.
So in that residential development, we'd include zoning, residential zoning.
Yeah, like what are the barriers for residential development in the CBD? And are any of those barriers things to do with the district plan?
Okay. Let me move to 3 recommendations actually to get the ball rolling. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Soper, thank you. Thanks for the discussion, Councillor. Is there any other questions or comments before I put those? So I keep getting distracted by Councillor Arnold's head in the sand. Someone has been buried at the beach there. I hope you're all right, Alan.
You see why I'm so upset.
High tide.
I'm okay.
Good. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. Nice to hear you, Councillor. Brings us to the Community Wellbeing Fund review. Rhiannon and Gemma, welcome.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Nō motopahoi aho,
ko Strategy and Policy taku mahi, ko Gemma taku ingoa. For those of you who don't know me, I am Gemma Crawford, the Engagement and Partnerships Officer in the Strategy and Policy team here at ICC. I will take the Community Wellbeing Fund Review Report as read. The Community Wellbeing Fund Committee recently held a workshop to discuss the first financial year of the fund and how it was tracking and whether anything needed to be reviewed. The main points you can see from the report are: 1, the option of adding a young person to the committee, the option of an additional piece of criteria that excludes operational costs for health services, the option of amending the scores for both economic and livability well-beings to aid the applications to more closely align with the purpose of the fund. And please also find at Appendix 1 an overall summary of the outcomes from the first 3 rounds of the Wellbeing Fund. This highlights which kind of projects funding went to and gives a clear picture of the fund distribution in the first financial year. So Councillor Lewis is the chair of the Community Wellbeing Fund Committee, and he may wish to add anything to what I have noted today, and I am of course happy to answer any questions. Kia ora.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Gemma and Rhiannon, for all the work you do. This 18-page, if you include the cover sheet report, is very extensive, and I think it speaks for itself. One might look at the grants that we've made, and you look at the $288,000 plus dollars granted, but if you, I didn't actually use a calculator, but my calculations of the amounts have been applied for at about 780,000. So there's quite a lot of work going through that, or the applications to rationalise the applications and try to ration the amounts that we have. We're limited to $500,000 per year by financial year. It's difficult, and I would like to thank very much Gemma, and particularly, and Rhiannon, and the other staff who are involved with all the organisation, and particularly the members of the committee, some of whom, of course, are community representatives, and hence the result from the Steve Bramley workshop, which all members attended, even by Zoom, that this consideration of considerations, I should say, of payment for all the hours that are involved on the committee, perhaps, which on the general review that was coming up later in the year. But basically, Chair, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a very good report, and I thank them, everybody, yet again. Thank you.
Do you want to?
And I'd like to move all recommendations on the cover sheet.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Kett, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Abbott?
Yes, I'd like to second that. How's the microphone?
Marginally better. Got a better thumbs up from Councillor Crackett than you did from me, but I'll note you as the seconder for that. Thank you.
Yeah, just to make the point that I'm particularly impressed that we're looking at the appointee of a young person.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis, can I ask what the feedback is that you've had from the community representatives from there taking part in the process?
They've been very enthusiastic, but the enthusiasm hasn't really been taken into account. The fact they attend and contribute sensibly and wisely, I think, is the most important thing, Chair.
Okay. Questions or comments? If not, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. That brings us to the update on the Invercargill Community Recreation and Sports Trust and Active Communities Grants Administration. These pauses for breath after that. Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, councillors. So, yes, this is just an update that was requested by the committee as to progress on this process. So I will just take the report as read and answer any questions.
Essentially, we're just noting the information that we've been provided with.
That's correct.
Thank you. I'm happy to move the 3 recommendations if there's a seconder.
Happy to second that.
Councillor Pottinger actually managed to get his digit up. Questions or comments? This is the feedback you were looking for. It has been helpful, so thank you for that. If there's none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. That brings us to the request for funding for the Lakes District and Air Rescue Trust. This was an item that was raised by Councillor Clark. There was a series of recommendations that came forward that we were looking for feedback and some more information around. Who's grabbing for the microphone on this one? I see one in Steve's hand, but it's really probably more down. Rhiannon, there you go. Thank you,
Sorry,
Rhiannon.
it's me again.
Don't apologise.
So again, I'll take this report as read. This report is really a follow-up to Councillor Clark's paper that he brought to the last committee meeting following the mayoral forum meeting, where this group presented with a request for funding. So from that committee meeting, it was requested that officers go away and bring forward some options for the committee to consider. So this paper is doing that. And yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. One of the recommendations that we examined last time was that our support would be conditional on the other TAs contributing as well. The third recommendation is looking for clarity. As I understand it, the other TAs have not opted to support it, which would leave us in the same position. Is that your understanding, Councillor Clark?
Yes, it was conditional to the other two councils supporting.
So I guess we would need more clarity around recommendation 3, around the option that we decline the opportunity to fund, bearing in mind that we were going to, I think 50, 30, 20 was the split, with us at 50, provided the others were at 30 and 20, but they're not.
They're not.
So the recommendation for option 3 would be that council declines the opportunity to fund based on that. I'm happy to move recommendation 1 and 2 and clarify that option 3 is that we decline the option to fund. Is there a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Soparangi.
Look, just seeking clarity around, normally requests like this I've seen in the past would come to our annual plans and time it with all councils and their annual plans, and so the timing to me doesn't quite seem right for for the amount of money we're talking here, how to factor it in. And I think it would get more, I guess, more consideration through that annual plan process rather than coming in.
Yeah, I guess that the opportunity always arises, and they'll have the opportunity to approach council through the annual plan process again
That's with
next
all three,
year.
three
But there
tiers.
will always be occasionally some organisations that, through various circumstances, didn't have the opportunity to submit then, who might come forward at some other point.
Yeah, I guess the reason I raise that with the annual plan thing is that when you're looking at 3 councils, doing the annual plan thing is at least you can get it on the sort of agenda, and some councils are quite strict and right, we're in there, and the rest of the year she's quiet.
Yeah, we're in lockdown for 3 years now. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have used that term. Pania.
I actually understand. I mean, this is a really important service to our community in some way or form. And under option 1, well, it's pretty obviously that it's pretty low scoring, so it's has made little benefit there for it. Would a contribution rather than 50k be more acceptable? I mean, for discussion, or
If the current motion on the table fails, yes. Councillor Abbott and then Councillor Arnold.
Yes, I just want some clarification. Are you moving the whole 3 new recommendations?
That was the proposal at this point. Would you rather I just started with the first 2?
I would, because I will be voting against the new 3.
Okay.
And just make a comment or two. It's suggested on page 111 that the Emergency Grants Fund talks about that. I just want to know when that was last used and what it was for.
Quite some time ago. Rhiannon, good luck.
I can speak, Councillor, to what it is for, but the question of when it was last used, we would need to seek guidance from the finance team. It is there for emergency scenarios such as flooding. Yep. But when it was last used, I'm afraid I can't answer now.
Last used and for what is what I wanted to know.
Probably around flooding,
Disaster.
I'm guessing.
Yeah, Michael's got the microphone.
Michael?
Yes, thank you. Through yourself, the Chair. Yes, the last time we've used funds of this nature is during flooding events. The funds are set aside for emergency situations. That's the purpose of them, but if it's the Council's desire that can be done in that way, but from a finance perspective, the purpose is fairly clear that they are there for emergency situations.
I agree. Councillor Arnold.
You always sort of think that it's an extremely important service, and I think that we should just take a lead on it. I mean, if the other councils decide not to come along, I believe that we should still do it. Because we are
You
the
can't
biggest
move
council in
anything
the,
at the moment, Councillor, but we
well,
take
no,
your
but,
point.
For number 3, I think it's something that we should do, and if we can fund it from the Community Wellbeing Fund, I mean, what better use for the Community Wellbeing Fund is there than something that's a service to everybody in Southland?
So just for your information, Councillor, the issue was referred to the Community Wellbeing Fund and it didn't actually meet their criteria.
Really?
Yep.
Well, I would support funding anyway, so if you're going to separate number 3 and do that, I'll be probably with the other ones that are going to vote
Thank you.
against it, I guess. Thanks.
Rhiannon?
Just a point of clarification, it hasn't been referred at this point to the Community Wellbeing Fund. We have scored the application as if it would be. Of course, the Community Wellbeing Fund Committee do debate every topic, so they don't necessarily always follow exactly the scoring criteria. You could refer it there, but we know obviously that it may not be successful. Just
Sorry,
to
I should
clarify.
correct what I said. I referred it to the Chair.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark, then Councillor Soper, then Councillor Scout.
Just a couple of issues of clarification. I think the last time the emergency fund was used was recently to resolve 2 residents in Matara that had not been able to resolve their flooding issue. So it is primarily for that sort of emergency, not for an emergency service as such. The issue of the 2.5 using the Steve Bramley thing, Steve Bramley's formula is an excellent tool for many things, but it's not a one fit all type thing. I mean, a classic example, if you use the Steve Bramley formula on Anderson's house, you'd never invest any money in it because it just doesn't stack up. But we do invest in quite heavily in Anderson's house and the surrounding gardens. So it's not a matter of just using that formula to say, hey, it's 2.5, it's not high enough. I'm disappointed that the other 2 councils haven't contributed, given that they were the ones that were driving the conversation at the mayoral forum. But I still think it's an important issue to do. I think most ratepayers would not jib at something less than $2 per year to have it available. It's a unique service. Yeah, you don't realise how important it is until you have a family member or somebody close to you that needs it. So still very much in favour of making some sort of donation towards the trust, even if the other councils don't. But I accept Rangi's point that I think it's probably an ideal situation where we might look to our annual plan if we wanted to solidify a sort of support on an ongoing basis.
Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make the point that one reason I seconded your alteration to recommendation 3 is, if you'll pardon me using the expression, a concern about this particular issue having the potential to open the floodgates to a lot of ad hoc applications from a whole host of bodies and organisations that in lots of ways may be unique and have very good stories to tell. But we have worked quite hard as a council, and particularly I refer to setting up Community Wellbeing Fund with the criteria it has, to try and get away from ad hocery in making decisions of this type. My concern about any other decision than what is in the recommendations today would be that it was an ad hoc type decision. We have tried very hard to move away from that, and I think it would open the floodgates in a way that we also tried to avoid. The suggestion about the possibility of approaching it long-term annual plan time has some sense to it, but again, we have to be careful about the criteria because we don't again want to open the floodgates to everybody turning up for annual plan every year. And my memory of Community Wellbeing Fund was to encourage some organisations that might have done that at annual plan time to look at Community Wellbeing Fund as a more appropriate fund to approach. So I'm just worried that this sort of application out of cycle with no policy covering it does have the potential again to open up a whole host of ad hoc applications that we really have tried to deal with in other ways. Thank you.
Councillor Skelt.
Through you, Chair, just, Rihanna, I wonder if you've got any explanation from the other 2As regarding their not contributing or making no contribution. After all, it came from the Mayoral Forum, which they actually drove initially, the initiative around this. What was the actual reasoning behind their decline?
So Gore have requested that they come and speak again directly to their council, Gore District Council, and Southern District Council indicated it's a matter they've discussed a number of times, and that was behind their decision.
So they discussed it a matter of times, but the conclusion was
I
don't matter?
That's the information that I was given. I certainly wouldn't want to speak on their behalf as.
And to Councillor Soper, the fact of ad hoc, I'm not sure we're ad hoc. It was brought up 4 or 5 months ago, and in actual fact, through the Mayoral Forum, it's incredibly short-sighted, to be honest. This is hardly ad hoc, and it affects everybody. So I find it staggering, absolutely staggering. Appalling.
Actually, Councillor, can I just caution you, because Councillor Soper was talking about the application process as being ad hoc. It certainly wasn't a comment from my interpretation of devaluing the service that's offered by the helicopter.
Oh no, I wasn't suggesting that. I was saying the decision of those 2 TAs was appalling. I'm very happy to validate that.
Right. Any other questions or comments at the moment? Because I will separate out and take the first 2 items, if not. So recommendations 1 and 2, they've been moved and seconded. I'll take a vote on those now. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. That brings us to recommendation 3, which has been moved and seconded, which is that we decline the application. And as the mover in speaking to that, I also am not devaluing the service that the Helicopter Trust offers. I guess my concern is, because I understand and know its worth and have heard its worth from many people who've had to make use of the service to travel from Southland Hospital to Dunedin. But there's part of me that goes, one of the other trusts, as is reported in the paper, is funded by the Otago Regional Council. So that way it takes a regional approach to funding, and it's a shame that approach hasn't been used here, and that the approach could have gone to Environment Southland. So that way we haven't got the 3 councils picking each other off and going, well, I will if you will. And dare I say, in full knowledge that somebody won't. And there's the out. So it is a shame that in this instance the Helicopter Trust didn't make the application to ES with that, because I think it is more an issue that covers the wider region rather than just Invercargill City. So again, just reinforcing that while I'm moving a motion that declines the option to fund, it is not at all intended as any form of devaluation of the value of the service. Open for other comments. Councillor Pottinger.
We live in a very unusual society where our main ambulance provider that we take for granted, that when we have an injury or something, has to go out and fundraise. And I think any country looking in from a distance would have a chuckle to think, what? You're serious that the government doesn't pay for your ambulances? It pays for police. Imagine the police fundraising. How would that go? Yeah, I'm not sure. But
they might struggle a bit more, to be honest.
Yeah. Or even you got to fundraise for your fire trucks. So you take this, an essential service. The ambulance one still baffles me. how we have to fundraise for that. But you take it to where the helicopter thing comes from, it's basically a airborne ambulance. So yeah, I think it needs to come back. I hope it does come back. They approach all 3 TAs for an annual plan.
Councillor Evanson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess what springs to my mind is we can't do everything. We have to prioritise, and part of what we did when we approved those recommendations around the community wellbeing was actually put some parameters on what we wanted to prioritise to fund and what we couldn't, because it's not our job to fund everything. We don't have enough money to do that. If you ask the government, we don't even have enough money to look after our own infrastructure properly. So to my mind, this is just not something that's within our remit of things that we should be prioritising. We did the same thing during the long-term plan when we said, you know, we're going to leave the water tower for now because we can't do everything. We have to prioritise. So I'm quite happy to support the recommendation in this case, because I don't believe this is something that should be a priority for our council or local government.
Thank you. Evelyn.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. This is something that council is then getting into, doing something that is actually the purview of the health sector or the emergency service response sector, not the council as such. I know you're doing it on behalf of citizens, and if we agreed to do it, we would be doing it on behalf of citizens, excuse me. However, I don't think that that is what citizens elect councillors to do, is to run an emergency response service. I think that passing it on to the long-term plan process is probably misleading them as to what their opportunity for funding from this council might be. In terms of Environment Southland and its broader overview, I'm not sure exactly where it sits with them either, but that's their issue, not ours. I just really think that we have got to be really careful that we don't start replicating or picking up the tab for services that actually fit more adequately with other agencies, and that by default we're being asked to pay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Skelt.
Hello. Just through you, Chair. Just if we're going to wait for the health department or the central government, it's going to be a very long wait, a hugely long wait. If the current regime continues the way it is with our health service, if we don't value people, that's fine, and we value bricks and mortar, that's fantastic. But this is about people. This is actually about people and saving lives of people. But if we don't have any credence around that, it's fine as a council.
It's a bit, but yeah, I'll come to you in a second, councillor. It's a bit sharp, councillor.
Sharp may be, but true.
I'm not finished. We could take the money from other funds that are bricks and mortar. To say that the decision doesn't value lives is actually tremendously unfair.
That's your point of view.
It's emotive.
That's your point of view. I'm entitled to my point of view, and I value people over bricks and mortar, Mr. Chair.
Yep, well, I'm chairing the meeting. Thank you. Councillor Arnold.
Well, I'm against the motion as you're putting it as well, because I also believe that there may be other opportunities, other possible funding avenues for this, but at the moment there's not. There's no one really coming forward, and I think it wouldn't hurt for us to take leadership on this. I mean, you've got the Wellbeing Fund, and I don't see anything that's better than Wellbeing. And the fact of the matter is that those other funders or the health board and things, they don't do this. So I believe that it wouldn't hurt for us to take a lead in this and perhaps use that fund for this, because the money should be there, and then perhaps going forward put it as part of the long-term plan. So as you put the recommendation, I'll be voting against it.
Okay, thank you. Other speakers? Councillor Crackett. Sorry, we're not getting you, councillor.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, sorry, button was off. I genuinely take exception to the fact that one of our councillors has stated that us voting for the motion and not to fund this is a vote against us caring for people. Because ultimately that's what everybody around here at this table is here for. It is absolutely demonstrative what our responsibilities are and what our core business is under the Local Government Act. We're not a house or a emergency fund provider, and we're not paid to do that under the Local Government Act. It's simply out of scope, and it isn't an effective use of ratepayer money for that cause. In my opinion, of course, you're very entitled to your own, but I reject the fact that you're stating that we don't care about people by not voting for it. I practically, yeah.
Thank you.
It's my 2 cents.
Councillors, I'm going to take a vote now, and vote will be by show of hands. So just so that we're clear, the motion is that the option to fund the Lakes District Air Rescue Trust is declined. So if you support the motion, if you could raise your hand now, please.
Can we just see, sorry, I just wanted to, sorry, point of order, I just wanted to see the motion in writing, sorry.
There you go. And read. So that's the motion that was put forward.
Right. You know, you just had the other motion up there at the time.
Yeah, sorry, cool, thank you. So all those in favour, again, if you could raise your hand, please. Just keep it up there while we do a count.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and Councillor Crackett 8.
It's a vote of 8, so the motion is carried. The issue is not closed, and I thank councillors for the passion with which they've spoken. The opportunity to raise the issue comes up again through the annual plan, or even the unexplored option of raising it with the regional council as it's funded by Dunedin. And, you know, I think there's many of us that would step forward and advocate for that to happen in that place. Again, recognising the value that we place on the service. Bearing in mind that we've just taken the vote, Councillor Abbott, I'm wondering what it is you have to say.
I'd like my vote recorded against it, please.
Thank you. Anybody else wish
And
their
my-
vote recorded against? Councillor Arnold, yes. Councillor Skelt, Councillor Clark.
So can I just clarify, Chair, that the vote was 8-7 in favour of the motion?
8.
8-4. We didn't take it.
Thank you.
I have 4 against. Did anybody else vote against? Did anybody abstain?
Yeah, I'm listing an abstention. I think there's more to be done.
Councillor Pottinger and His Worship have both abstained from voting.
Thank you.
8-5. Comfortable with that? Well, comfortable's the best term I can come up with at the moment. Again, thank you for your opinions and for the debate. We move now to the Great South Letter of Expectation. Rhiannon.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Sorry.
just note that I'm a director of Great South for council.
Thank you. Noted.
Thank you, Chair. So this report outlines the Great South Letter of Expectation and Statement of Intent process. That is a process that happens annually. So the report lays out the time frame, and it includes recommendations for council to consider around the priorities to be set for Great South and around the breakdown of the funding. So following your discussion today, your recommendations and the text from this report, which may be amended following your discussion, will be sent to Great South in a letter via the mayoral forum. So they will receive everyone's feedback together.
Thank you. Can I ask, following a presentation recently from Great South, there was mention around potential support for an eyesight. That's not covered in this, is it?
no. So what they've indicated is they may respond at the time of statement of intent with some additional options that councillors may wish to consider at that time.
Thank you. Councillors, there are 3 recommendations there, looking for a mover and a seconder first of all.
I'll move that.
Councillor Pottinger, Councillor Amundsen. It's open for discussion and or comment. Councillor Pottinger.
Yeah, this covers exactly what we talked about in that workshop, and I think it's nailed it. So, yeah.
I guess one of the things the workshop recognised is that there were works in progress that were interrupted by COVID. There's still work around housing that we've yet to see some resolution and recommendation from, but again, the interruption to business hasn't helped with that. So it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. And finally, open the activity reports. Happy to move that the report is received. If there's a seconder, Councillor Lewis, thank you. Any questions or comments, councillors? Again, interesting to see that activities, particularly around the library and Splash Palace, affected by lockdowns and restrictions on numbers that have been able to attend, but also recognising that these business arms were very nimble and quick to react. Of course, they didn't have much choice, and seeking clarity around the changing landscape of how many people you can have and what you do has been a challenge that they've met well. And despite all that, there have actually been some very groovy things going on at the library, I noted. However, if there are no other questions or comments, yes, Councillor Scalp.
Just you, Chair, Steve, I wonder how you and your staff have felt around the communications coming out of the alert level changes and so on for your venues. Have they been clear? The clarity's been clear?
It's a very good question, Councillor Scalp, through you, Mr. Chair. Look, I think most people are dealing with responding to the evolving situation, and in certain areas, our pools and our venues, indoor venues in particular, there have been some quite tough requirements, and whilst we're managing to try and deliver a service for the community at the same time as responding to the alert level requirements, there have been some challenges. But really proud of the team, and I think that's evidenced by the way that, in particular in the Civic, the way that the DHB and our council staff work together to turn the vaccination clinic around within 24 hours to keep providing vaccinations for our community is a good response, and that's symptomatic of a lot of council staff working with what we're given and then applying their management nous to make sure that our community can access the services and are safe doing so.
In a roundabout way, I guess what he's saying, and you'll appreciate it being in the venues business, is that they've done their best to operate in a vacuum of information at times, which has not been useful, but I think they've performed well.
And just Steve, just from a point of care, just the staff wellbeing, mental health, they're all, without going into any depth, in general terms across the venues and so on, they're all coping well.
Look, it is one of the things that through our alert level plans that we have instigated regular workshop or toolbox talks where we're not only checking in on how we're following our alert levels, but we're also checking in on each other. And so across the board at the Hei-Wakatuia, at the Civic, at facilities, that's a regular daily occurrence, if not 2 or 3 times a day with the changeover of shifts. So I'm pretty happy with the way our team are checking in. It's not to say there aren't issues, but we're certainly trying to deal with them with our teams.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just Steve. In relation to library, Splash Palace and some other venues that we may open up as we get further towards the end of the year, you've heard the government say they may introduce vaccination passports for people to come in. So no jabs, you don't come in. What will the City Council approach be to staff that are actually in those premises? Will they be required to also be vaccinated come early December, or will there be a different approach?
Answer that.
Clear.
Mr. Chair, given it's a staffing matter, I think the easiest way in which I could answer that is that the council will follow the requirements set out by government.
So you're not teachers and you're not health workers.
We're not teachers and we're not health workers. I am very mindful that the requirements the government has and the reasons for introducing those requirements could well extend to many of the staff that we employ, but I would prefer not to be on the front page of the Southland Times. Being a trend setter, I think we will follow the requirements that they set out for us as they work through their own processes.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Councillor Clark thinking
Councillor
further
Clark.
on
Yes, yes. I'm just thinking about it, and I don't want us to be on the front page either, but I do.
But
well, I do think it's relevant for as a proactive council that if we are asking the community to be safe when they come to venues that we manage, that we should be on the front foot and encouraging at least our frontline staff to be also vaccinated.
Councillor, there is a world of difference between encouragement and requirement.
Yes.
I think Emily Pankhurst might have pointed that one out, and the position hasn't really changed. So we'll stick with the encouragement and we'll wait until we're required.
In fact, we would encourage everybody.
But I am concerned, and it's no joke from me, I am concerned that the calls of encouragement to get vaccinated are so many that they could get lost. The message could get lost.
And I guess it also it strikes a point where, you know, people are getting passionate and vociferous, and I understand that, but sometimes that doesn't help for people who are on the cusp. And if I cast my mind back to my personal position when I enjoyed the pleasure of smoking cigarettes, oh God, back in the days when I had money, and I knew it was bad for me, and I had 100 people telling me that I should stop, but that just encouraged me to dig my toes in until I made a rational decision and gave it up.
Mr. Chair, you have highlighted that there are people, and we have them on staff, who are unable to be vaccinated for medical reasons, and we just have to be really careful. There was somebody reported to me yesterday as being an anti-vaxxer, and in fact it was on the basis of a severe negative reaction to something previous that they'd been advised not to get the jab. I'm not sure that there's anything attractive about being encouraged to get a jab, but we just need to be mindful that people do have different states of health in a whole variety of ways.
I've gone from being a 20-a-day smoker to a 5-a-day jabber. It's not often I get to joke about diabetes, but you know.
We could be chasing.
Any other comments or queries around the activities report?
Look, I would just conclude by assuring Councillor Clark and all councillors that we are watching this space. ELT discussed it as early as this morning, or as recently as this morning, so we are watching the space.
I guess our obligation may be beyond what's set by government, I guess. If the government says we're not going to force the issue of no jabs, no jobs, and that may well be the case, I guess we would have a moral obligation if people were coming to one of our high intensity venues to say not all our staff are vaccinated. That gives the community some choices as well.
We'll take advice at the time.
Yeah, sure.
I think there's a matter in here that I've been advised about relating to proportionality.
Yes.
So we'll just wait and see.
Because the same will work in reverse for those people wanting to go to venues being asked whether they've been vaccinated or not. So,
But could we be very clear that there is no point in introducing things that we have no ability to monitor or enforce? And that is also a bit of a challenge. So the idea of no jabs, no getting into a venue may well come down to an honesty system rather than a regulatory system. And I'm not looking for an extension of regulatory powers.
Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Chair. Aren't we looking at that for Three Waters? no local government, no Three Waters reform.
I wonder where the vaccination was coming in at that point. It's been moved and seconded, so I'm now going to put the motion. All those in favour of receiving the report say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Before we go into public excluded, and I'll go into that process in just a moment, can I just offer a note of support to our mana whenua representatives and welcome you to the joys of public consultation and submissions. And that often people have views about council that we've all had to endure in the past, and I'm sorry that at the first meeting you've had to experience some of that, but may I commend you on the dignity of your silence. I'll move that we go into public excluded to discuss the receiving of the PE minutes of the Community Wellbeing Fund from August 26 for reason under section 721, and also consultation options for ICL similarly under section 721.
Mr. Chair, just before you do that, the report for consultation options was circulated late, so it should be received as a major late item.
So before I go to that, I'll move that we receive it as a major late item. Seconded, Councillor Pottinger. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. And now I'll
second the going into
PE?
public excluded with the
Thank you.
exception of Mr. Grant and Mr. Mackenzie.
Noted. Put that motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. For those that have been joining us on the live stream, thank you. We'll now pause while we go into public excluded.